Okay, this is kind of a part 2 episode. If you remember a short while back, I worked on this piece here, the Graves Meat Company. What is it? Rave at Graves. And the circuit board was bad, and I couldn't get the characters to move. So I just disconnected them so it wouldn't burn up the circuitry. So, just to show you, let's plug it back in. So everything works, but there's no movement. Well, the owner sent it back to me with a parts house that he acquired that is in bad shape. I'll kind of give you a close-up. You can see it's glued back together because apparently it's been dropped. And the front's busted out of it pretty good. And this piece was in the box, which went up here somewhere, I think. So, but this one works. So, this one has a bad circuit board where it receives the sending unit notification and it just sends the motor in one direction, which just burns up the motor and burns up the belt. This one, all the lights and sound work, as you just saw. All the lights are on and flashing.
Welcome to the Rave at Graves. Would you like me to take your room?
Why, thank you, big fella. That's so kind of you.
So, this one, even though the house was physically destroyed and then glued back together as best as possible, the internals still work, and that's the important part. That's what we need to make this one work. I know there's some people out there that don't like taking old houses apart and using them for parts, but unfortunately it's necessary evil. Not all the parts can be acquired without using a donor. So it's just like when you restore a car. So because this one's in bad shape, we're going to take the bottom out of it, pull the circuit board out, put the circuit board in here, swap the wire connections over with a lot of soldering, and then send this one back. This one would just be parts to be used for other things, such as the LED lights, or if somebody has their pumpkin broke off or the werewolf guy broke off, it can heat this up and, you know, get replacement parts for somebody. So I'm going to push the good one out of the way, and the broken piece will just get out of the way as well. And disconnect the power. And just like most, we got to get this rubber mat off. Since it was dropped, I'm wondering, well, I'm assuming it's dropped. Please don't quote me on that. Based on the shatter pattern, it looks like it may have been dropped. Since it was broke, I'm assuming there's a good chance this mat will just peel right off. Because when you jar the porcelain and it starts cracking, it separates the glue. Also, some of the age of the mats, they just peel right off. This one's doing pretty good so far. It's not tearing. Of course, you know, I said it's going to. Wiring out of the glue. There is one spot right here that is stuck pretty good. So I'm just going to use a scraper, X-Acto knife, and try and get under and get the glue out. This is usually always the longest part, just getting these foam mats off. But if you can't get yours off, and you don't want it, and you don't have the ability to heat it, you can, or the heat's not working, you can get mats over at Michael's that have adhesive already on them, and you can just cut the shape out and stick them on. It just won't say Lemax on the bottom. So here is the characters and the mechanism, and the circuit board is up inside, which you probably can see through here now since it's adhered to the back. There is a single screw that holds the circuit board in, if you remember from the last video. And it's right behind this fake piece of, it's a piece of wood that's glued to a piece of brick. It's fake, it's not real, it's porcelain or resin. I'll tell you here in a second. Resin. So I'll get that out. It's a Phillips screw. Hopefully it's not full of glue, then we can get into it. Good. We now have the circuit board separated, and there it'd be. The only thing that unplugs from it is generally the speaker and the motor, which are these two plugs here. Everything else is soldered on the front and back. And there is a lot of wires. This is something you got to take your time and be very patient with. Take lots of pictures so you know what wires go where. Luckily, if one of these wires broke off, there's one sitting right here that I can use when I start doing the swap. Another option is to, when you trim the wires, instead of desoldering them, cut them up an inch or so from the board, ½ inch maybe, so you can see the colors. There's one side effect, or downside, not side effect, to this. They use the same color wires for a lot of things. I got multiple greens, multiple reds, multiple purples, multiple yellows, and whites. The only ones that aren't really multiplied because they're slightly different shades would be the switch. The switch is more of a pastel green and a pastel yellow versus a dark green and a dark yellow. So the Rave at Graves has a lot of circuitry for such a small house, and that's because it's using switches to change directions of the motor for these moving characters up here in the front. So if I remember, on the other one I replaced one of the gears inside here, so I'm not going to reuse any of this. I'm just going to reuse the circuit board. So, first thing we want to do before we start any of this is free up all the wires. Get all the glue where it's glued down, broke free, so you have plenty of slack, because you're going to want slack. And there's a lot of wires glued to the speaker. Since the speaker is unplugged, I'm just going to remove it from the house once I get everything off of it. So there's the speaker. Kind of looks like maybe this has been opened, or it was re-glued when it has broken, meaning that they didn't take the bottom off, they just glued the parts back in and then reassembled the house around it. We know the speaker's still good, and we know that a lot of the older Lemax houses use this style speaker where it's in the black housing and the speaker's glued in the back. A lot of the newer ones use smaller speakers that are glued directly to the house. And then, like I said, this plug here, the other plug I unplugged, is your motor. So I'm just going to fish this out of the rat's nest of wiring. So now the motor is isolated. This other house, I put a brand new motor in it because the motor was also bad. Apparently there's a gnat or something that came with this house. And I don't need to swap the motor over. It's just, this will all be spare parts, this mechanism, for another Rave at Graves if another one comes up that's got a broken part. Characters are broke, backing's missing, drive system is bad. So you can also label everything, which is a lot of wiring and a lot of tape, but you can take masking tape and label these two red wires. An example right here. These two red wires is the micro switch for this. These two black wires is the micro switch for this. So you can label, these two black wires off the board, tape them together, because it doesn't care which way the wires go. They're not polarized. They're just a switch to make contact. So you can put little pieces of masking tape on your wiring as well. My suggestion is to take lots of pictures, and in any wires that are of the same color, mark at least one of them. Like this is a yellow and white wire, and this is a yellow and white wire. There's a good chance they're doing the same thing at the same time, but since it's two different wires soldered to the board, it's worth indicating that this one goes in the house and this one goes around the border of the house. So if you get them backwards, it just means your lights won't flash in sequence to the soundtrack. So that's it. It's not going to hurt the functionality, it just may not be in sequence. Alright, so it's time to take a whole bunch of pictures. If you're taking pictures of the same spots, just get different angles so you can actually see the solder pads. Because, again, we got lots of wires, you got a rat's nest in here, and we need to make sure that we put everything back in the right place. There we go. Alright, phone's put away. Alrighty. So, step one, we got the house apart. Step two, we got pictures and info. Now, I would normally just desolder the wires from the circuit board, but I don't want to apply heat twice to the circuitry. I'm going to have to apply it when I put it back in the other house. So I'm going to trim the wires, meaning I'm going to cut them up so I still have some color on there, so I can figure out exactly what goes where. These three wires here that are pastel are the switch. It does appear that all these yellow and white wires that I was telling you might have to isolate are all soldered to the same spot, so you technically don't have to isolate them. Not all these wires go up into the house. Like this black wire right here goes from the top of the board to the bottom. That's why I'm not cutting them indiscriminately. It's because not all the wires need to be cut. So, and then over here we have a white and a gray and a white and a gray. So before I cut those, I want to see where they go. Okay, they go to the lights on the roof. This light and this light that fell out. Probably the reason they're separated is they flash independently from each other. I wasn't paying attention to the flash patterns when I was, showing you that the house functions. This red wire, same thing, it doesn't have to be cut because it's just soldered to the back side of the circuit board. It's almost like a bomb technician. Cut the wrong wire and blows up. Alrighty, what's left? These are the lights for there. Take your time when you're doing stuff like this, because there is no reference. It's not like you can go to Lemax and ask them for a schematic and color code and location. They're not going to give you one. So here's the circuit board. Give you a close up. And the reason I wasn't cutting all those wires indiscriminately, or I was trying not to, was this wire and this wire, and technically this wire, which I did accidentally cut. We'll put it back together right there. Don't need to be cut. So this is an easy fix. I'll just cut, solder, and put a piece of heat shrink over it. But I didn't mean to cut that white wire, which is white here but yellow here from probably age and use. So with these leads stuck off, I can now open this house and match the red and green wires and then move them to this board, removing these pieces. So it's a visual reminder, even though I have lots of pictures, it's a visual reminder of what goes where. So if you want to pause it, that's the back of your circuit board with your colors. That's the front of your circuit board with your colors. Just remember this wire got accidentally cut when I was snipping. So there are 3 wires that go top to bottom, and then 1 wire that stays on the bottom, which is from here to here. that do not have to be cut or desoldered to remove this circuit board. So I'm going to go ahead and fix this one real quick, and then we're going to take that one apart and start the process. It's going to be a pretty boring video. It's just a whole bunch of soldering. But the point of it is to show that if you have to get the donor house for circuitry, do it carefully. You only have one chance. And if you screw up your circuitry, there's usually no coming back from that. So I'm just going to put all the pieces out back in the donor house so I have a little bit more bench space. So I'm going to fix this and get that house opened up, and we'll be back. Okay, I have the other house open. I removed the little plate, got the circuit board hanging out. Here is the wires for the motor. The original cord that I put in there that I twist tied in is right here. I took it out. That's what plugs into the board. I unplugged the speaker from this board. And I repaired this one. As you can see, there's a solder and heat shrink. So, next step, and this is the easiest way of going about it, even though there's pictures, and this is in case you get distracted, something comes up, somebody knocks at your door. Take the board and go, this wire goes here, this wire goes here, and do one at a time. Front's not so bad, you only got 6 wires, 7 wires. Backside, very important. So I'm going to sit here and transfer every wire to this circuit board one at a time using soldering pen and lead solder so it'll last better. Use a fine tip on your solder pen or gun because these pads are so close together you don't want to bridge the pads. So I'm going to spend the next God knows how long swapping everything over, and then we're going to test it, and of course I'll actually connect the motor wires with the cord that fell that I just showed you a second ago. It fell inside the other house. I set it on top and it just fell in. So I'll connect that up to the motor so this can actually work like it's supposed to. So anyhow, shall return here momentarily with hopefully a functioning house. And since this is a parts house over here, I'm going to try and take this rubber mat that it tore a little bit but not too bad, and put it on this house that I put a generic mat on. So that way this is back to the OEM look. So that'll be done at the end. First things first, start working on this soldering. Okay, after nearly an hour of soldering and working on this, I just started testing it. And the old speaker, for some reason, didn't like the new circuit board. I'm wondering if they're a different wattage. So I just plugged the old speaker back into the old board. They might be matched. I had the same problem with this motor. This motor assembly from the original, when I plugged into the circuit board, was putting a large draw on it. So, and the circuit boards are actually slightly different. There is one set of pins different. So I'm wondering if this is a different generation. So this is the original one from this house, and it doesn't work right. The load is different. When I hook up the original mechanism to the original circuit board, works fine. Same with the speaker. When I hooked up the original speaker from this house, the speaker was all crackly. When I hooked up the new speaker from the parts house, it sounds beautiful again. So
Welcome to the Rave and Rave. Would you like me to take your bro?
Why, thank you, big fella. That's so kind of you.
So, there's a balance or load difference between the parts house and the new house, which is why I wanted to do it one wire at a time and do all the testing. The speaker could just be damaged, this one, when it was taken out and worked on, or it's a different ohms rating or wattage, but it doesn't sound as good. It's very crackly. But on the back, where I desoldered all the wires, which here's the pile of little wires from this board, I desoldered them and then just matched the colors. One set of wires is different. Where this one has a group of yellows and one purple, they're on a different pin on this board. So I just followed this board since this board is the one we need to have working. This board is probably a different generation. I'm looking to see if there's a generation number or anything on the board. There's no markings to tell me anything. So, give you an example. The Dr. Stretch and Pull's Torture Factory, there's a Gen 1 and a Gen 2. And the big difference that most people notice is the guillotine goes up and down. On the circuit board, they added a set of pads for the motor. So I'm wondering if this is the same thing. One of these is a Gen 1, one of these is a Gen 2, and by moving those wires, either made it work better or worse. I don't know, because there's no generation numbers or any part numbers for me to reference to give me an approximate date of manufacture. So, this says 2011 and this says 2011. So it could just be the circuit boards were modified slightly. So I'm going to go ahead and pop out this speaker that's glued right here in this corner and pop in the new speaker. I'm going to screw the circuit board in, tuck up all the wires, insulate them. I'm going to go ahead and open this gearbox to make sure none of the gears are broke, because you know it's very common to have a broken 10 tooth. And then we're going to reassemble it. What is nice is the pad's already stuck to this base, and the characters are in good shape, and I started cleaning off some of the debris. So this parts house, we're going to use a lot of it to fix the original. About 50% of it actually. And the original switch, this thing, this is of course the good house, but from the other house, will be used for one of his others that he sent me that has a bad switch. So, and that's going to work out perfectly. So this parts house is going to fix 2 different houses for him, which is kind of nice. So anyway, all I got to do is tidy up the wires, cover the bare contacts. They use hot glue to do that. I am not going to use hot glue. I am going to use heat shrink. I have a little electronic heat shrink, which is very thin, to fix all the bare wires. I don't like when the glue is used, because when the glue breaks free, you have a chance of arcing. And there's no fuses on these circuit boards, so if you arc the board, it's done. So, but anyhow, there's the update showing it works with the new circuit board put in. And of course we're going to put in a new speaker and a new drive mechanism, since they're all matched and it's working perfectly. When I put that one in again, it doesn't work perfectly. It starts bogging the house down and makes the lights dim. So there's a draw difference between that, which is a brand new motor, so maybe that motor is just too strong for it, and then this speaker. I'm not sure why the speaker would make a difference. They're usually all the same, but apparently this speaker sounds better than this speaker. So I'm going to go ahead and swap the speakers. As you saw, it's pretty easy. You just unplug it and then re-glue it back in. I would recommend hot glue so you can remove it in the future if you ever have to replace your speaker. I'm going to clean up the wires, shove it in, and then re-adhere the mat. And then we're going to test it one final time, fully assembled, so we can see this thing working as it was meant to be. Okay, it's all back together. It's just reverse of taking it apart. So it's not too hard. Just make sure everything's lined up and all the wires are tucked out of the way. I heat shrunk all the wires and I glued them back down to the plate on the bottom and to the back so they don't get caught in the moving mechanisms. I put the fake brick cover thingy on the back.
Hi, Al. Welcome to the Rave and Rave. Would you like
So,
to take your brew?
Why, thank you, big fella. That's so kind of you.
Ah, the party's right. Yo, Frankie.
I hope they play some rap music tonight.
turn the lights back on. Turn it off so we can actually hear. So, it's back together. It functions. I found out why the old speaker sounded horrible. It had come apart. I saw the housing, but this had fallen out, was vibrating on the inside of the house. So the glue broke. That's why it sounded horrible. So probably in the process of peeling the bottom out, this, because it's only held on with a little dab on the side, popped off and it was vibrating horribly. Since I already peeled this out, and I just put the other speaker in because it had a bigger glue line, and I just put the new speaker back in. So at least I found out why the speaker started to sound bad afterwards. It's not, like I said, a very exciting video. It's basically just get your donor house, get your circuit board, and then solder one wire off, one wire on. Go back and forth so you're good. And then check your wires, because this one has 4 wires that do not need to be desoldered. Red, black, white, and yellow. You saw I cut one by accident and I fixed it real quick. So it now has a new circuit board, since this one doesn't read the sensor. It has a new drive mechanism, since the new motor I put in the other one and this house don't like each other, or this old circuit board. This circuit board runs that motor just fine, but this donor board does not. So this is a 300 CA motor that's in the house. The replacement motor that I put in this the last time is a generic 300 CA generic, and it is something like a BC5. I can't read it, it's all the way on the wrong side. So at least on this one, the generic or other company's motor isn't working correctly, at least with this circuit board. So it's back together, it's functioning. We got movement, sound, lights, the whole 9. So it'll go back in its box and be shipped back to its owner. So appreciate you watching. Basically, tear the old house apart, tear your donor house apart, do it carefully of course. Mark your wires, take pictures just in case you make a mistake, and then I would desolder and resolder one at a time. And the reason I left those little pigtails that were sitting here in a pile that I've thrown away so I can clean off my bench a little is so I can match the colors. When the 4 wires here go white, gray, I know I remove the first white, the second white, the first gray, the second gray. Then when I flip it over, I know, okay, I remove this solder pad here, and then I follow the solder pads one for one. So the only difference between the two is there was a cluster of wires that were diagonal from each other. On this board, there was 2 even clusters. On the other board, it had 2 wires and then a whole bunch more. So it changes the light patterns because they're the wires for the lights. So, but other than that, any questions or concerns, leave them below. Until the next video, where we fix more broken animatronics.